My brother and I love each other. I love him deeply. There has been a lot of pain.
Princess Diana's fortune has long been a source of fascination, but recent revelations have shocked the world. Prince Harry has learned that significant portions of his mother's inheritance may have quietly shifted behind palace walls, hidden from public view. For decades, the story of Diana's fortune seemed straightforward. Yet now, questions arise. Where did the missing millions go? And what does this mean for the legacy she intended for her sons? The fortune Princess Diana left behind. For years, the story surrounding Princess Diana's fortune appeared simple and reassuring to the public. After her tragic death in Paris during 1997, attention shifted toward the future of her two sons. Prince William and Prince Harry were still very young, and many believed their mother had carefully secured their financial future long before her life ended so suddenly. Across Britain and beyond, newspapers repeated the same comforting narrative again and again. Diana had left behind a personal fortune that would eventually belong to the boys she loved so deeply. Her visible affection for William and Harry, the hugs, laughter, and public displays of care, reinforced the belief that she had protected their future. The shock of Diana's death created one of the most emotional public moments the modern royal family had ever experienced. Outside Kensington Palace, thousands gathered while leaving flowers that covered the streets surrounding the residence. Television cameras captured scenes of grief that seemed almost impossible to comprehend. People who had never met Diana personally felt as though they had lost someone close to them. Behind palace doors, however, lawyers, financial advisors, and estate administrators quietly reviewed the documents connected to Diana's personal finances. Their responsibility was to determine exactly what assets she had owned at the time of her death. Much of Diana's wealth came from the divorce settlement she reached with Prince Charles the year before she died. The separation between the Prince and Princess of Wales was finalized in 1996. Reports suggested Diana had received a settlement worth roughly £17 million, along with other financial arrangements allowing her to maintain independence from the royal household. Many observers believed Diana had secured a very comfortable position for herself. She had stepped away from the formal structure of the royal family, but remained one of the most recognizable women in the world. Her charity work continued drawing attention wherever she traveled, from hospitals to international humanitarian campaigns. Even outside the palace structure, Diana's global influence had not diminished. That independence meant she controlled a significant personal estate that needed careful management after her death. Financial advisors explained the inheritance would be placed into trusts until William and Harry reached adulthood. Prince William was 15 years old at the time, and Prince Harry was just 12. Neither could legally control such a fortune themselves, so the plan was to protect the funds and allow them to grow gradually over the years. By the time the princes were older, the inheritance would be waiting for them. That was the explanation the public received. Behind the scenes, however, organizing Diana's estate proved more complicated than people realized. Her wealth was not stored in a single account. It consisted of multiple financial arrangements created during different periods of her life. Some investments dated back to the early years of her marriage to Prince Charles. Others appeared later after her divorce. Personal possessions, jewelry collections, and designer clothing required detailed evaluation. Certain charitable commitments also needed careful legal consideration. Taxes, administrative expenses, and estate management costs created additional adjustments. Accountants slowly reviewed each detail, and every small revision slightly altered the numbers that appeared in official records. Individually, the changes seemed routine, but collectively, they created a picture more complicated than the public narrative suggested. None of these details reached the public during those early years. Royal financial matters were rarely discussed openly beyond brief official statements. Discretion had always been one of the monarchy's most powerful traditions. Sensitive information stayed within small circles of advisors, lawyers, and financial managers, sworn to confidentiality. Even journalists who spent their careers covering the royal family struggled to obtain accurate records. As a result, the simple story remained widely accepted by almost everyone watching from the outside. Yet, within certain financial circles, questions had begun to surface. Some individuals who reviewed the estate documents noticed details that did not perfectly match earlier expectations. Those observations remained private for many years, buried deep within financial records and confidential discussions. William and Harry grew into adulthood while the world continued believing the familiar story of their mother's fortune. The estate was supposed to be waiting for them, exactly as everyone had always heard. But as time passed, a handful of professionals who had worked closely with royal accounts began revisiting the documents. Among them was a banker who had spent years studying royal estates. For decades, he had remained silent about what he saw, but eventually, his review would force a reconsideration of the story the world had believed. When those revelations reached Prince Harry, they would leave him stunned. The royal banker who finally spoke. For decades, the story of Princess Diana's fortune remained unquestioned by the public. The official explanation always seemed straightforward, and very few believed anything unusual occurred behind the numbers. Prince William and Prince Harry grew older, and most assumed their inheritance had followed the carefully arranged plans described after 1997. Yet, inside financial circles, some who had worked on Diana's estate occasionally revisited the records and noticed discrepancies. Among them was a senior banker who had spent years advising on accounts connected to the royal family. His knowledge of the estate's structure would later prove pivotal in uncovering details no one else had revealed publicly. This banker had been involved in reviewing the financial structures protecting Diana's assets after her death. His role was technical and required extreme discretion, which kept him out of public view. While the world mourned Diana, he analyzed spreadsheets, trusts, and investment accounts connected to her estate. The work was meticulous and often unglamorous, yet it revealed subtle movements of funds that few noticed at the time. Initially, everything appeared routine, and he assumed there was nothing unusual about the transactions. Small discrepancies caught his attention, though at first he dismissed them as normal adjustments made by administrators handling complex estates. For years, he said nothing, because speaking publicly about royal finances could have ended his career. The monarchy relies on strict discretion, and advisors understand their reputations depend on confidentiality. Even journalists with decades of experience struggled to access accurate financial records. Meanwhile, the princes grew into adults, and the public continued believing the familiar story of Diana's estate. The banker maintained his silence, but the details he remembered never fully left his mind. He knew that revisiting those discrepancies could reveal significant insights about the hidden movements of the fortune. In the early 2020s, interest in royal finances surged through books, documentaries, and investigative research projects. Historians and researchers began examining estate structures, asking questions that had never been publicly raised before. During this period, the banker was approached by someone investigating Diana's finances, seeking general explanations about how royal trusts were structured. At first, he provided broad descriptions, focusing on legal and financial procedures rather than specific numbers. However, the conversation soon turned to comparisons between early projections of Diana's estate and later financial summaries. It became clear that some of the figures did not align with what the public had been told. What surprised him most was the scale of certain adjustments made quietly during estate management. Legal channels had been used to redirect portions of funds, often through investment vehicles rarely discussed outside banking circles. The process was legitimate, yet the final distribution differed from early expectations, raising questions that no one had addressed publicly. Even years later, those adjustments remained unusual enough to capture the banker's attention. Once he explained the details, the implications became clear to the researchers who had approached him. The estate was not as straightforward as it had seemed for decades, and the public story required serious reconsideration. The banker's revelations suggested that some of Diana's projected millions had moved in ways few had noticed at the time. He could not definitively say where every pound had gone, but his testimony indicated that the estate had undergone significant internal restructuring. Legal procedures had been followed, yet the resulting distribution diverged from the original expectations. For Prince Harry, hearing that parts of his mother's fortune might have quietly shifted elsewhere was deeply unsettling. The discovery challenged his understanding of the narrative he had grown up believing. It also marked the beginning of a larger financial mystery surrounding Diana's legacy that had remained hidden for decades. The millions that no one could account for. Princess Diana's estate was widely believed to contain a large sum meant entirely for her sons. Early reports after 1997 suggested that William and Harry would inherit tens of millions of pounds from her personal fortune. These figures came from her divorce settlement with Prince Charles, combined with investments, properties, and other assets she had accumulated over the years. The public assumed every detail of the inheritance had been meticulously managed to ensure the boy's financial security. Yet when the royal banker revisited the estate records decades later, he noticed that certain millions seemed unaccounted for. Portions of the money appeared to have been moved, redirected, or restructured in ways the public had never been told about. The banker explained that some of these movements were technically legal and followed proper procedures, yet they raised questions about transparency. Certain transfers occurred quietly through investment channels that shielded them from public scrutiny. Taxes, administrative costs, and trust management fees accounted for some differences, but the scale of the adjustments was unusual. The original estimates of Diana's fortune did not align with the later numbers reported for William and Harry. Even trusted advisors involved in managing the estate were surprised when these discrepancies were discovered. Over time, it became clear that parts of the fortune had shifted in ways no one outside the inner financial circle could explain. For Prince Harry, learning about these missing millions was particularly shocking. He had grown up trusting the official narrative that his mother's fortune was preserved entirely for him and his brother. The realization that some funds might have quietly disappeared or been reallocated created a sense of betrayal. He began questioning not only the financial decisions made after Diana's death, but also the motives behind them. The banker emphasized that the estate had been structured to protect the monarchy as much as the princes. Certain financial decisions had likely been made to safeguard the institution rather than maximize the inheritance for William and Harry. This revelation was both deeply personal and historically significant for the royal family. Some of the missing millions were tied to complex investment strategies, including offshore accounts and trusts designed for long-term growth. The banker noted that these arrangements were not unusual for wealthy families, but the lack of clear communication caused confusion decades later. Many experts reviewing the estate records struggled to reconcile the numbers, even with detailed documentation. The fact that significant amounts could be legally moved without public knowledge added to the mystery surrounding Diana's estate. Observers who once assumed the inheritance was straightforward began to question whether every pound intended for the princes had remained accessible. It became clear that understanding the full scope of the fortune would require digging deeper into financial and legal archives. The public had no knowledge of these hidden adjustments, and media reports rarely questioned the integrity of Diana's estate. For decades, journalists repeated the same story. William and Harry were the rightful heirs to their mother's fortune. The discovery of these discrepancies altered the narrative, introducing a new layer of complexity and intrigue. Harry's shock reflected not just financial concerns, but emotional ones as well. The missing millions represented a disruption in the story he had trusted about his mother's legacy. He wondered why decisions had been made without the knowledge of those most affected. Each new revelation added to the sense that the true story of Diana's estate was far from complete. The banker's testimony suggested that while the estate had been managed professionally, some of its wealth had quietly moved into unexpected areas. These adjustments may have been motivated by a desire to protect the monarchy rather than deprive Diana's sons. Regardless of intent, the effect was clear. Certain millions were no longer immediately traceable in the public record. Harry was forced to confront a reality that contradicted the narrative he had grown up believing. Understanding the full extent of the missing fortune would require transparency and access that the royal family rarely grants. Yet even partial insights were enough to shock him profoundly. The mystery of these millions was not just about money, but about trust, secrecy, and the hidden mechanisms of power. The quiet decisions made behind palace walls. Inside the royal household, financial and personal decisions rarely occur in public view, and the management of Diana's estate was no exception. After 1997, advisors and senior officials quickly convened to determine how best to protect the inheritance intended for William and Harry. These decisions were guided not only by financial prudence, but also by the desire to safeguard the monarchy's reputation. In such circumstances, transparency often yields to discretion, and the true motives behind certain actions remain hidden from public scrutiny. The banker, who later revealed the missing millions, suggested that some of the transfers he observed were influenced more by institutional priorities than personal interests. Small adjustments, technically legal and carefully documented, shifted the structure of Diana's fortune in subtle but significant ways. For decades, the public assumed that all decisions regarding Diana's wealth were made to benefit her sons exclusively. Trusts were established, investments were monitored, and advisors maintained regular oversight. Yet the internal conversations behind palace walls painted a more complex picture. Certain funds were redirected to financial vehicles, designed to ensure the estate remained insulated from risk, political scrutiny, and market volatility. While these measures protected the capital, they also meant that some of the inheritance became less immediately accessible to William and Harry than the public assumed. The banker noted that these moves were routine in elite financial management, but carried unintended consequences. Over time, they created gaps between projected wealth and the amounts that were formally recognized as available to the princes. Within the palace, the handling of Diana's estate was considered part of a broader tradition of safeguarding the institution above all else. Decisions were made quietly, often in consultation with a small circle of senior advisors and legal experts. These individuals had to balance the financial security of the heirs with the public perception of the monarchy. Any misstep could provoke controversy, invite scrutiny, or compromise decades of carefully maintained public trust. In this environment, the notion of complete openness was nearly impossible. Harry, decades later, would come to realize that many of these quiet choices had long-term implications. The very design of the estate's administration, intended for protection, inadvertently fostered a sense of secrecy and confusion. The banker described how, immediately following Diana's death, advisors reviewed every aspect of her estate with painstaking attention. Properties, jewelry, charitable commitments, and liquid funds were cataloged and evaluated. Trusts were created to ensure that funds would grow steadily and remain shielded from financial risks. However, certain decisions were taken that adjusted the allocation of assets in ways the public would never have anticipated. Some of Diana's investments were moved into vehicles controlled by professional managers, with discretion over their timing and execution. Other portions of the fortune were earmarked for long-term institutional purposes, rather than immediate inheritance. Each adjustment followed legal protocols, but the net effect created a divergence from the original projections of Diana's wealth. Prince Harry's awareness of these quiet palace decisions came much later, long after he had grown up and left the direct sphere of daily royal life. The realization that some of his mother's fortune had been subtly redirected was a shock. For someone who had trusted that the inheritance had been managed solely for his and William's benefit, the discovery raised questions about motive, transparency, and loyalty. The banker emphasized that there was no indication of malicious intent. Rather, the choices reflected centuries of tradition, where the institution often takes precedence over individuals, even if they are the direct heirs. Yet for Harry, the emotional impact was unavoidable, because the missing millions represented both a financial and symbolic separation from his mother's legacy. Even among advisors, there were differing opinions about how to proceed with the estate. Some prioritized immediate liquidity for the princes, while others emphasized long-term growth and preservation. Certain properties were kept within family trusts, some assets were reinvested, and others were redirected to accounts with limited visibility. Each decision, while rational from a professional standpoint, created a layer of complexity that would later contribute to confusion and speculation. The banker explained that these choices, while logical, were made without consulting the ultimate beneficiaries in a meaningful way. The very structure intended to protect William and Harry inadvertently led to gaps in understanding and delayed recognition of the full extent of the wealth that had been allocated to them. The quiet management of Diana's estate exemplifies the tension between tradition and transparency within the royal family. While advisors acted to safeguard assets and shield the monarchy from criticism, the princes were largely unaware of these internal maneuvers. This secrecy, though standard, had emotional repercussions decades later. Harry's discovery of the missing millions was not only about money, but also about trust, agency, and the hidden mechanisms of power within the palace. Decisions made quietly behind closed doors shaped the narrative he had believed for most of his life. They created a complex web where financial prudence, institutional protection, and personal inheritance intersected in ways few outside the inner circle could fully comprehend. The impact of these quiet decisions would continue to ripple across the family and the public's perception for years to come. Harry's reaction when the truth surfaced. Prince Harry had spent decades believing that his mother's fortune had been preserved entirely for him and his brother. The story he had grown up with suggested that every pound Diana had carefully accumulated would one day be accessible to William and him. Yet the revelations brought forward by the royal banker painted a very different picture than the one he had been told. For Harry, the realization that millions might have quietly shifted elsewhere created a mixture of shock, anger, and confusion. He struggled to reconcile his trust in the official narrative with the new information that suggested otherwise. This was not merely a financial discovery, but an emotional confrontation with the way decisions had been made without his knowledge. Initially, Harry questioned whether the discrepancies were intentional or simply the result of standard financial management. The banker explained that while all movements were technically legal, they were executed with minimal transparency for the beneficiaries. These adjustments, often routed through complex trusts and offshore accounts, meant that some funds were not immediately accessible despite being intended for him. Harry began to understand the extent to which institutional priorities had influenced the distribution of his mother's estate. The realization was jarring because it challenged his lifelong understanding of Diana's intentions. For someone who had built his identity partly around his mother's legacy, this was deeply unsettling. His first reaction was disbelief. How could decisions affecting him and William have been made without consultation? As he processed the information, anger began to surface, directed not at his mother, but at the mechanisms that had obscured her estate's management. Harry had always been deeply connected to Diana's memory, and learning that parts of her fortune were moved quietly behind palace walls felt like a betrayal. He questioned the motives of the advisors and senior officials involved in the estate's administration, wondering whether institutional caution had eclipsed personal loyalty. The banker reassured him that no laws had been broken and no malicious intent was evident, but the emotional weight remained heavy. Over time, Harry realized that the missing millions were not simply about financial loss. They symbolized the broader tension between personal desire and institutional control within the royal family. For years, he had assumed that Diana's wishes had been executed with perfect fidelity, and now he faced a reality that was far more complex. The missing millions represented secrecy, tradition, and the hidden processes of a monarchy that prioritizes discretion above all else. Harry began reflecting on how these quiet decisions, while legal, had profoundly shaped his understanding of inheritance, trust, and family dynamics. The revelation forced him to confront the hidden layers of authority that influence even those closest to the royal family. Despite the shock, Harry approached the situation with a measure of pragmatism. He acknowledged the necessity of discretion in certain royal matters and accepted that some financial restructuring may have been unavoidable. Yet, he also realized the importance of transparency, especially for heirs directly affected by these decisions. Conversations with the banker provided clarity, but left lingering questions about the allocation of Diana's wealth. He recognized that understanding the full truth might require further investigation, careful examination of financial records, and potentially legal guidance. The experience left him determined to uncover as much as possible, while balancing respect for tradition with the pursuit of clarity. Harry's response to the revelations also had emotional consequences beyond finances. He began to reevaluate his relationship with the monarchy, the expectations placed upon him, and the hidden power structures that governed the royal family. The missing millions were a tangible manifestation of the broader system of secrecy and control he had experienced throughout his life. Understanding these quiet, behind-the-scenes decisions reshaped his perspective on trust, loyalty, and the legacy of his mother. For Harry, the experience was transformative, emphasizing the intersection of family, money, and institutional authority. It also reinforced the realization that Diana's legacy, while cherished, had been managed in ways more complicated than he could have imagined. Ultimately, Harry's reaction combined disbelief, determination, and reflection. The revelations challenged his assumptions and highlighted the opaque mechanisms of the royal family. They also underscored the complexity of inheritance, even for direct heirs, and the power of discretion within the monarchy. While some of the missing millions may never be fully accounted for, the experience pushed Harry to seek answers and confront the realities of royal financial management. It marked a turning point in his understanding of his mother's estate and the ways that quiet decisions made behind palace walls can resonate decades later. For him, the truth was both shocking and enlightening, forever reshaping his perception of Diana's legacy. The aftermath and what it means for the princes. The revelations about Diana's estate sent ripples throughout the royal family and beyond. For Harry, they represented a profound disruption to the narrative he had grown up believing about his mother's legacy. The missing millions were more than a financial matter. They symbolized secrecy, discretion, and the hidden priorities of an institution that often values preservation over personal transparency. William, too, had to confront the reality that the inheritance they assumed was fully intact had been quietly managed in ways neither brother fully understood. Conversations with advisors, legal experts, and the royal banker provided clarity, but also raised further questions about how decisions were made. The experience left both princes acutely aware of the complexity of wealth within the monarchy and the layers of protection placed around it. For the public, the story offered a rare glimpse into the private workings of the royal household. While much of the estate remained secure, the fact that some of Diana's fortune had shifted behind closed doors challenged the widely held assumptions about transparency and fairness. Journalists and historians immediately began re-examining the official narratives that had long gone unquestioned. The missing millions became a symbol of the delicate balance between protecting heirs and safeguarding the institution. Analysts emphasized that legal and professional safeguards had been followed, yet the emotional impact on the princes could not be ignored. The estate's restructuring highlighted the subtle but powerful ways that discretion operates within royal finances. Harry's understanding of the situation also influenced his broader relationship with the monarchy. He recognized that the same traditions and priorities that had quietly shaped his inheritance also governed many aspects of royal life. The experience reinforced the importance of questioning, investigating, and understanding the hidden mechanisms that affect both personal and public legacies. While trust in advisors remained, the princes realized that assumptions about how the estate functioned could not be taken for granted. They had to balance respect for tradition with their own desire for clarity and control over their mother's legacy. In doing so, they gained a more nuanced perspective on both their inheritance and the institution they were born into. Ultimately, the aftermath of these revelations was a combination of practical and emotional lessons. Financially, the estate remained substantial, providing security and opportunity for both William and Harry. Emotionally, the princes grappled with the knowledge that some decisions were made without their input, despite being the intended beneficiaries. The story also underscored the enduring influence of Diana's legacy, not only in the wealth she left behind, but in the values she instilled in her children. For Harry, especially, the experience marked a turning point, prompting reflection on transparency, trust, and the ways that love and institutional duty intersect. As the princes moved forward, the lessons from Diana's estate became part of their understanding of responsibility, legacy, and the role of discretion in their lives. The missing millions, though never fully accounted for publicly, served as a reminder of the delicate balance between personal inheritance and institutional priorities. For both William and Harry, the experience underscored the complexity of royal life and the importance of vigilance, even in matters long assumed to be straightforward. The story of Diana's fortune, with all its hidden shifts and quiet decisions, will continue to shape their understanding of family, duty, and the invisible forces that govern their world. The story of Princess Diana's missing millions reminds us that even the most public legacies can hide private mysteries. For Prince Harry, the revelations were shocking, emotional, and transformative, forcing him to confront questions of trust, loyalty, and the hidden mechanisms of royal power. The decisions made quietly behind palace walls shaped not only his inheritance, but also his understanding of family and duty. As the world continues to watch the royal family, one thing is certain: behind every public story lies layers of secrecy, unseen choices, and untold truths. Diana's legacy remains complex, powerful, and unforgettable.